Erica, asked if I'd just go over some of the, basic life history of the tortoise. And, probably most everybody in here is familiar with the gopher tortoise, but, maybe not. And not really presenting anything new, just again, the basic scorecard for the gopher tortoise, if you will. But, one exciting thing, about this organization, we have a new acronym to keep track of. And if you have a warped sense of humor like me, you like to see, do we share our acronym with any other group? So, don't worry, I did the research for you. And we do. The Atlanta Lawn Tennis Association. They've been around a lot longer than we have, since 1934, but I'm sure they're a good group, and maybe we can have a joint meeting someday. But back to a more serious topic. We have to tip our hats to turtles. They've been around a long time. Turtles are certainly survivors. Some of the first fossil records of the turtles goes back, to the Triassic period, over 250 million years ago. So turtles, literally saw the rise and, and fall and ultimate extinction of the dinosaurs. And, like dinosaurs, there are some, spectacular turtles that are no longer with us. Certainly you have to talk about Archelon, the largest turtle that ever existed, a huge sea turtle, 13 feet long, 4,500 pounds, a tremendous animal. It's no longer with us, obviously, but we still have some spectacular turtles. I guess, the leatherback sea turtle, the largest now, approaches, 6 feet and 1,000 pounds. A large turtle indeed, but, not nearly as large as Archelon once was. Sea turtles had a little advantage being in the water. They could, the water providing buoyancy could support the large weight. Turtles on the land, tortoises have, different problems, lugging around that shell, toting around their house. So, they're adapted, for the life on the land, and their limbs have been evolved and adapted to help, carry their weight upon the surface or upon the land. Not speedsters, so to speak, but, turtles move along pretty good for themselves, and, a lot of people aren't familiar with gopher tortoises are surprised how fast those animals can actually move. But, keep it on the topic of just turtles in general. Alabama is certainly blessed with an abundance of turtles, great turtle diversity. No other state in the union matches the diversity of turtles. Some 40 species and subspecies are recognized to occur in Alabama. And if you look at it, about 10% of all the world's turtles occur right here in Alabama. So we have something, to be very proud of, and certainly a resource we don't want to see slip away at all. Now, if you're interested in turtles, not just the gopher tortoise, but all turtles of Alabama, I would advise you to, particularly this holiday season, to get a copy of Turtles of Alabama. I mean, it's the go-to guide and reference for turtles in the state. And, a lot of smartphones out here. I'm sure you've got Amazon on there. So, if you already, like I said, I'm not going over a lot of new stuff. So take your time and pick up a copy of Turtles of Alabama. Put it on your shelf. You will not regret it. Now, sticking with the genus Gophorus, which the gopher tortoise obviously belongs to, there are 5 of them in North America, 4 occurring in the United States. Of course, obviously here in the southeast, the gopher tortoise. Swing west into Texas, you got the Texas tortoise, and the 2 desert tortoises out there in the desert southwest. There's an additional tortoise, the Bolson tortoise, that occurs in Mexico. Just talking about the tortoise in general, I think, it's hard to mistake the gopher tortoise for any other land turtle you'll come across on the landscape. Adults, typical adults, around a foot long. I think the maximum length approaches 14 inches. And good healthy adults, a very, stout turtle, and you pick one up, it's healthy, it feels very dense, weighing, somewhere upwards of 10 pounds. And females are slightly larger than the males. And, one of the hurdles, if you want to call it a hurdle, in conservation of certainly the gopher tortoise, it's a long time it takes to reach sexual maturity, 15, maybe even 20 years. Tend to be slow-growing animals, depending on the habitat, obviously growing faster in good habitat, not as fast in the lesser habitats. And these are long-lived animals, 40, 50, over 60 years, they can survive. So, maybe that's an advantage to them. They can live through the hard times and, do some good conservation for them. They can rebound in areas. The adults, they tend to be grayish, almost blackish in color. Juveniles are obviously going to be smaller and tend to be more brown in color. And, I get a lot of calls, well, I'd say a lot. I've gotten several over the years, people coming across a turtle on the land, and let's say I think I've got a gopher tortoise, and it's hard for me to believe you think it when you think you have a gopher tortoise. Really, how can you mistake it for anything else? And they'll go on and say, yeah, this turtle built a big old hole. I was walking in the back of my property, and this turtle's built a big hole in my property. And I say, well, how big a hole is it? They say, well, I can almost crawl into that hole. So, wait a minute, you don't have a gopher tortoise. We can take care of that right off the bat. And several of these have turned up on the landscape. These spur-thighed tortoise, they're popular in the pet trade, and they can live a long time. Probably many outlive their owners, or they outlive their welcome, so to speak. And they can get very large, up to 3 feet and well over 100 pounds or so. And so occasionally people come across these animals in the environment, but obviously they are not gopher tortoises. Mention the males and the females. Females slightly larger. It's easy to tell the adults, female, males apart. Just flip them over, look at the plastron. You'll notice a definite concavity in the plastron of the males that's lacking in the female. The smaller turtles, it's harder to sex than the adults, but again, the adults are easy to separate the males and females. Hatchlings, of course, they start out very small, inch or two in length, and they're kind of brightly colored, more kind of almost a yellowish color, if you will, with the darker markings around the scutes there. So they're very, very boldly marked, if you will. They can dig their own burrow, and they might hang out in the burrow of the adult. And kind of a disadvantage they have, they really don't get the hardened shell until around 7 or more years. So up to that time, they're susceptible to just a variety of predators that, just love to just eat them. I guess when they're tiny like this, it's like eating popcorn for some of those animals. Speaking about some of the behavior of the gopher tortoise, they're essentially active year-round. It doesn't really get that cold down here. We do have cold spells, like compared today and maybe tomorrow, the next few days. Certainly the last couple of days you have tortoises active, but come tomorrow and the next several days, it's going to be chilly for us down here. So the tortoises will retreat down their burrow and remain inactive for maybe several days on time. Gopher tortoises are very social animals, living in colonies, a lot of interaction between individuals. If you observe them long enough, you can see individuals, some head bobbing and smelling of each other, and even some, combat, if you will, depending on what kind of activity you got, mating or maybe some territorial dispute. So again, they're very social animals. As far as the activity regimen you have, most of the time spent basking, usually right outside the burrow there. And obviously spend a lot of time walking around searching for food items. The better habitat, the animal does not have to search as far to get food. And then a little bit of time spent, feeding and obviously nesting and mating activities. Home ranges vary. Again, a lot depends on the habitat. If you get really good habitat, the turtle does not have to wander far to get what it needs to survive. Males tend to have larger home ranges, up to about 4 acres. Females a little smaller there, up to about 2. And of course, the juveniles are going to have naturally even smaller home ranges. Reproduction, nesting. Nesting begins, or mating, I should say, begins there in the spring, running from April to June, with eggs being laid sometime there in the late spring or maybe into summer. Eggs are laid about maybe 6 eggs on average, but I think on record you have up to about 25 eggs laid by the turtle. They resemble ping pong balls. I think you can maybe see in that lower right-hand picture there. Incubation varies from about 80 days to almost 4 months, depending on the conditions or where the eggs are laid. Most eggs are laid on the apron of the burrow there or nearby in the suitable sandy soils. And of course, a lot of times the young turtles don't even have a chance to hatch out. Nest predation is tremendous with turtles, and they're lucky to get off one successful nest every 10 years. So again, the animal takes a long time to reach sexual maturity, and then having a tremendous nest predation rate. These are obviously factors that will hinder the tortoise as far as populating an area or making a comeback into areas as they're being managed. Of course, the animal's famous for the burrow. Obviously are adapted to constructing a burrow, tremendous diggers, so those flattened 4 feet. And obviously the burrow is an adaptation for survival, where they can seek shelter from the extreme environments, the heat of the summer, or the cold of the winter, and obviously to escape predators. And to another fact, in well-managed gopher tortoise habitat should be frequent fires. and so they can escape fires and the dangers from it by escaping down into the burrow. Burrows can reach up to 30 feet, over 6 to 10 feet underground. So it's a tremendous feat of engineering for this animal. And the most obvious sign of the burrow is that apron, which they'll maintain with fresh dirt almost daily. So walking around the landscape, it's easy to see or easy to spot an active gopher tortoise burrow. It is a keystone species. Many of the animals that share the habitats of the gopher tortoise, they also share the burrow. They need the burrow for some of the same reasons the gopher tortoise does, protection from predators. So I think it's been documented, over 350 species have been documented using or sharing the gopher tortoise burrow, ranges from invertebrates to vertebrates. So just a wide host of species depend or need the gopher tortoise to survive as well. One disease I mentioned, upper respiratory tract disease. It's a mycoplasmal bacteria. This affects other animals too, different species, but in birds you have conjunctivitis, and finches and turkeys are susceptible to some mycoplasmal bacteria as well. But a tortoise showing signs of upper respiratory tract disease, runny nose, swollen eyes, wheezing. Obviously, it's just like a real bad head cold. I think we can all sympathize with the turtle that's got this. So, certainly a turtle, experiencing this, if it's in a stressed environment, it's going to be behind the 8 ball. Certainly don't want to move turtles that are showing signs of the disease. That puts them under additional stresses, and then you can ultimately lead to the death of the turtle. Some individuals might actually have the bacteria, but they don't express any symptoms of the disease. And it's spread through contact, like the mycoplasma is in the birds. I think, Erica touched on this. I think had the similar slide there, the protection status of the animal. Alabama is unique in that it has part of the listed ranges in Alabama west of the Mobile and Tongue-Bigby rivers. It is listed as threatened species, placed on that list in 1987. The rest of the range in Alabama, as you see there in those colored counties, it's protected under non-game regulation, but there really is no habitat component of that regulation. Basically, it keeps you from outright killing the turtle, keeping, possessing, selling, etc. of the turtle. Again, no habitat component with the non-game regulation in protection of the gopher tortoise. I think Josh Rao will speak on some of the listing potentials for the gopher. There's other animals that are struggling as well in the same habitats, diamondback rattlesnake, the gopher frog, southern hognose snake. So these are all animals are being reviewed as possible additions to the endangered species list. You have several animals already listed in the range of the gopher tortoise: the indigo snake, red cockaded woodpecker, and the black pine snake. Now, Drew's going to touch on habitat, but I thought I'd mention, to borrow, a well-known saying from Justice Potter Stewart. He said, and I think it works for gopher tortoises as well, I can't define gopher tortoise habitat, but I know it when I see it. And I think that really works for probably a lot of us. You really can't define it, but when you're out in the woods looking around, you got open pine habitat, you got sandy soil, you got open ground, that's gopher tortoise habitat. It might be hard to define, but you know it when you see it. Well, that went over like a lead balloon, that joke. Can we edit that out? You don't remember? Yeah, whatever. And I said, Drew's going to talk about a habitat, but I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about some of the important habitat components for the modern gopher tortoise. And 3 are very important, or at least I think they're very important. Well, 1, forestry lanes. 2, food plots. Probably the most important habitat feature out there for gopher tortoises, the utility rights of ways. Now, of course, I'm being a little facetious here. We don't want to manage just for that, for the gopher tortoise. But in many cases, this is where the gopher tortoise is essentially squeezed out of, the proper habitat, or these are the last holdouts for the gopher in lands or areas that aren't, intentionally managed or properly managed. Of course, the traditional or natural habitat for the gopher tortoise, follows a lot of the longleaf pine native range. It's an animal of, open pine woods, sandy soils where you have sunlight hitting the ground, spurring growth of, forbs and grasses from which a variety of the tortoise feeds upon. And so what happens over time, these areas aren't managed. You get the understory, you get shrubby growth, the light no longer hits the ground, you don't have the plants growing on the ground for the gopher tortoise to feed on until it evolves an ability to climb trees or bushes or a 2-foot long neck. The gopher's going to be in trouble if we don't manage these landscapes. And so I'll just mention this on habitat management. And again, stop me if you heard this. You ever heard this? We need to burn more. I mean, probably if you're like me, if you've gone to any meeting over the years, you've probably heard this phrase. If you had $1 for every time you heard we need to burn more, you'd all be wealthy. And true, that's probably maybe the single most important thing you can do out on the landscape for the gopher tortoise. Of course, it's a lot easier said than done. All you need to burn your land more. Many of you can speak more intelligently and fully on this matter, but again, it's a lot easier said than done. There's other issues, obviously, many issues involved with burning the lands, a lot of liability, smoke management, when do you burn, probably, natural fires that benefited the gopher tortoise throughout the eons were probably, warm season fires. But, if all you can do is burn in the wintertime, I guess some fire is better than no fire, obviously. But I think, Drew, you might talk a little bit more about habitat management. And, of course, just a myriad of threats that, face wildlife in general, certainly include the gopher tortoise there. Urban sprawl, the growth of populations, converting, woodlands into shopping centers or subdivisions, like converting land. Now green energy might not be so green for certain animals. Solar farms take up a lot of open lands there and might not be beneficial for the gopher tortoise, so to speak. And of course, land that's not managed, as we see there on the right there, no fire there. Again, the shrubbery understory is going to grow up and shade out the land and eventually squeeze out the gopher tortoise. And some of the best places walking through the woods to find a gopher tortoise might be a forestry lane, might be a food plot, or a utility right-of-way. And of course, I have to mention invasive species. They're another hurdle for the gopher tortoise. These include plants and animals. Fire ants, they got to, I think, arrive in the Port of Mobile, in the early 1920s or 30s, spread across the southeast, and tremendous vicious predator there. Occur in just a variety of habitats. There's some poor sea turtle that never made it to the ocean, being covered up with fire ants. Kogan grass, I think we all know that, scourge of the southeast now. That's a tremendous problem there. With these invasive species, we're not going to get rid of them. The best you can do is hope to manage or maybe keep them under control in your area. So again, we're just not going to be able to get rid of them from the landscape. And that's a quick rundown there. I think certainly kept us on time, but you can ask me a question here if I don't have an answer, and we certainly have some turtle experts here that can answer the question. I threw this slide here because you talk to school groups, and when you talk to kids, sometimes they'll just stump you on their questions. And I know a typical question I get, kids would ask what's the fastest turtle in the world? I don't know. I can lie to them, but don't like to do that. So I don't know who did this. Obviously, I stole this off the internet, so I appreciate whoever did that. But when I can always tell them, I show them, well, that's the fastest turtle in the world right there, and they seem to be pleased with that answer. But again, appreciate your attention. I don't know if you have any questions right now. I'd be glad to try to answer it or pass it off to somebody who can answer the question.